James Earl Carter Jr., known as Jimmy, the 39th President of the United States, was born on October 1, 1924, in Plains, Georgia, a small farming community in the Deep South. He was the eldest son of James Earl Carter Sr., a farmer and businessman, and Lillian Carter, a nurse. He said his mother taught me to treat every person as equal, no matter the race or background. That lesson shaped my entire life. Carter grew up in a household with no electricity or indoor plumbing. He was raised on a peanut farm. Given his own acre of his father's farmland, he grew, packaged, and sold peanuts. By the age of 13, he bought 5 houses and rented it to families in the area. Jimmy describes his early life on the farm was full and enjoyable, isolated but not lonely. We always had enough to eat. No economic hardship, but no money to waste. We felt close to nature, close to members of our family, and close to God. It was this rural setting that Jimmy grew to adulthood. In 1941, Jimmy was said to be valedictorian, but he skipped school with his friends on April Fool's Day. He wound up as a salutatorian at Plains High School, eventually enrolling in Georgia's Southwestern College. Determined to take his ambitions further, Carter later transferred to the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, and also enrolled in the Naval ROTC program. From there, in 1943, he entered the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. Also, he was a standout freshman cross-country runner and a football player for the Navy midshipmen. Carter himself said, "Education opened doors for me that I never thought possible. It gave me the tools to pursue a life of service." Although Eleanor Rosalind Smith had known Jimmy all her life, it wasn't until 1945 that romance blossomed. Prior to his last year, while on leave, Jimmy spotted his sister and Rosalind walking down the street, and he impulsively asked her to the movies.
And then we started corresponding, and by the time Christmas came, I was swept off my feet.
Jimmy was immediately smitten after their first date, telling his mother that he had met his future wife. And when Jimmy first proposed marriage, she actually turned him down, telling him that she promised her father, who had died in 1940, that she would finish college. But Jimmy persisted, and when Rosalind visited Annapolis that spring, they became engaged. And after they both graduated, then they were married on July 7th, 1946, at Plains Methodist Church, and began building a partnership that would endure for decades. In a poem to Rosalind, he wrote, "She'd smile and birds would feel that they no longer had to sing, or it may be that I failed to hear their song." In Rosalind's memoir, First Lady from Plains, she wrote, "The moon was full in the sky, conversation came easy, and I was in love." So, the Carters had 4 children: John William, Jack, James Earl III, Chip, Donald Jeffrey, Jeff, and a daughter, Amy Lynn. Subsequent deployments took the family to Hawaii, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, before they put down roots in New York. They both really enjoyed traveling and seeing new parts of the world. Rosalind shared Jimmy's values of service, humility, and determination, and together they created a life rooted in mutual respect and shared a vision of making a difference in the world. So now he served in the Navy from 1946 to 1953. After 2 years of surface ship duty, he applied for submarine duty and served on the USS SSK-1 in multiple roles as the executive officer and engineering officer. In 1952, he got involved in the Navy's new nuclear submarine program and promoted to lieutenant by Admiral Hyman Rickover. Carter would later say, "I think second to my own father, Rickover had more effect on my life than any other man." He was also awarded a myriad of honors and medals. One heroic moment of his was when he helped with the world's first nuclear reactor meltdown in Canada in 1952, where he trained and led his Navy team to repair the reactor in 90-second increments. His exposure to nuclear technology and advanced naval strategies would influence much of his later thinking, particularly his decision to pursue nuclear disarmament and his eventual stance against the development of a neutron bomb. Carter was set to work on the USS Seawolf, the second U.S. nuclear submarine. Then came bad news from planes. Carter's father died of cancer in 1953, prompting him to leave the Navy and return home to run the family's peanut farm. This return to his rural roots was not merely practical, but deeply personal. He recalled, "I returned to Plains with a sense of responsibility, not just to my family, but to the people who had supported us for so long." It was an opportunity to preserve his family legacy while engaging directly with the community that had shaped him. Coming back, he dove into farming, trying to expand the family's peanut business, but faced major struggles like crop failure due to a drought. He had to open several lines of credit just to keep the farm afloat. Meanwhile, he took classes and studied agriculture, while Rosalind learned accounting to manage the business's books. Despite tough beginnings, they managed to turn things around, and hard work made the Carter farm prosperous by 1959. Yet, Carter's ambitions extended beyond financial success. Jimmy Carter's involvement in his local community increased as he began joining local boards for hospitals and libraries. He also became a church deacon and Sunday school teacher at the Plains Baptist Church. Witnessing the social and racial inequalities of the South firsthand inspired him to take action. His mother's earlier example of kindness toward members of the African American community left a lasting impression on him. Carter became an outspoken advocate for civil rights at a time when such views was deeply unpopular in Georgia. He said, "I couldn't stand by and ignore injustice. My faith and upbringing demanded that I speak out." He first ran for office in 1955, winning a seat on the Sumter County Board of Education, and later becoming its chairman. Fast forward to 1962, when he entered the Georgia State Senate race, and after losing initially due to voter fraud, he challenged the results and won. Now serving as Georgia State's senator from 1963 to 1971, Carter spoke up on a few divisive issues, giving speeches against literacy tests and against an amendment to the Georgia Constitution that he felt implied a compulsion to practice religion. Also, he entered the state Democratic Executive Committee 2 years into office, where he helped rewrite the state party's rules. He became the chairman of the West Central Georgia Planning and Development Commission, which oversaw the disbursement of federal and state grants for projects. So, Carter was re-elected to a second 2-year term in the state Senate, where he chaired its Education Committee and sat on the Appropriations Committee toward the end of the term. Carter also worked on state education funding and helped expand Georgia Southwestern State University into a 4-year program. Fast forward to 1966, where Carter lost his first gubernatorial campaign. But, of course, he persevered and won the next election, becoming Georgia's 76th governor, serving from 1971 to 1975. On January 12, 1971, in his inaugural address, he declared
that the time for racial discrimination is over. No poor, rural, weak, or black person should ever have to bear the additional burden of being deprived of the opportunity of an education, a job, or simple justice.
Also reducing a $57 million deficit and making the budgeting process more efficient. Also, he pushed through several reforms, better school funding to rich and poor areas, setting up community centers for mentally disabled children, and increasing educational programs for convicts. Because of all this, he got national attention, even landing on the cover of Time magazine as a symbol of the New South. Fast forward a bit, Carter had his eye on national politics, serving on the National Governors Conference Executive Committee and helped out with the 1974 DNC campaigns. Then, in December 1974, he officially announces he is running for president. Carter's entry into the 1976 presidential race came at a time when Watergate had just rocked the nation, and the American public was deeply disillusioned with Washington politics. They wanted somebody they could trust, an honest politician. Incoming Jimmy Carter, a relative outsider who promised a return to integrity in government. Campaigning on the phrase,
"I'll never tell a lie. I'll never make a misleading statement.
The problem was, Americans didn't even know who he was.
But that would change.
Jimmy who?
Jimmy Carter?
Jimmy who?
I don't know who he is.
In response, he emphasized the phrase,
"My name is Jimmy Carter and I'm running for president."
Also, Carter published his first book, titled Why Not the Best, to help introduce himself to the people. On July 15th, the New York Times wrote, "Governor Carter's achievement is the result of political acuity and organizing skill, of keen intelligence and iron resolve. He knew what he had to do to win the nomination, and with courage, resourcefulness, and self-discipline, plus the indispensable support of an amazingly efficient staff, and quite a little bit of old luck, he has achieved his initial goal." Well, his campaign resonated with voters, and Carter narrowly defeated Gerald Ford, receiving 297 electoral votes and 50.1% of the popular vote. On January 20th, 1977, Jimmy Carter was inaugurated as the 39th President of the United States. One of his first acts was the fulfillment of a campaign promise by issuing an executive order of declaring amnesty for Vietnam War draft dodgers. He wanted the country to heal and move forward. His first steps in the White House went further. Carter cut the size of the 500-member White House staff by 1/3 and reduced the perks for the president and cabinet members. He also brought his own team, which wasn't received well. And when Congress turned his tax plan into a bunch of special interest favors, Carter didn't mince words, calling the taxing committees a pack of ravenous wolves.
Jimmy Carter was someone who was very idealistic, wanted to do the right thing, but I felt like he never had the kind of pragmatic political sense that you need in order to negotiate the power centers that you have to negotiate in Washington if you're going to get anything done.
So a pattern of mutual distrust and conflict had been set. Congress didn't hold back either, striking down his consumer protection bill and a labor reform package. British historian Yvonne Morgan argues Carter traced his political values to early 20th century Southern progressivism, with its concern for economy and efficiency in government. He described himself as a fiscal conservative, but liberal on matters like civil rights, the environment, and helping people to overcome handicaps to lead fruitful lives, end quote. At the time when Carter took office, the economy was experiencing a period of immense stagflation, a combination of high inflation and low economic growth. Unemployment was at 8% and 7.5 million Americans were out of work. Early on in his administration, Carter introduced a wide array of ambitious programs for social, administrative, and economic reform. Most of these programs, however, met with opposition in Congress, despite the Democratic majorities. Carter's primary domestic goal was to tackle unemployment and get the economy back on track. As he put it, the battle against unemployment must be waged with all the energy we can muster. His first step was working with Congress to pass the Economic Stimulus Appropriations Act, which allocated $21 billion to job-creating initiatives. This included $4 billion for public work programs that created around 200,000 jobs, $1.5 billion for youth employment programs, and $5 billion in tax reductions. By mid-1978, Carter's presidency saw slow but steady improvement. The unemployment rate declined from 8.1% when he took office to 5.7% by July 1978. He said, "We must ensure that every American has a chance to work and contribute." Carter also signed the Public Works Employment Act of 1977, which provided additional grants for local public works projects. This helped create jobs for construction workers and the youth. While the act helped to lower unemployment, some economists argued that the increased government spending fueled the stagflation. Inflation went from 8% in 1976 to a whopping 13.5% by 1980. On the tax front, Carter signed the Revenue Act of 1978, which included a $19 billion tax cut. Despite these efforts, The national debt grew from $620 billion in 1977 to $900 billion by 1980. However, the economy grew faster than the debt, so the federal debt to GDP ratio actually decreased slightly from 33.6% to 31.8%. Carter also took steps to deregulate industries like airlines, trucking, and railroads to encourage competition, lower prices, and improve services. The Airline Deregulation Act of 1978, for example, made air travel cheaper and more accessible to the public, but led to fewer services for smaller cities and job instability in the industry. Carter also supported the Federal Reserve's decision to raise interest rates, even though it was a tough pill to swallow for many. As Carter put it, it was about doing what we can with what we have. Building on the advance of the civil rights movement, Carter made strides toward ensuring equality for all citizens. Carter stated, "We cannot call ourselves a free and fair nation while inequalities persist in opportunity and injustice. Change starts at the top." Carter was deeply committed to ensuring anti-discrimination policies and appointed more women and minorities to judicial and administrative positions. When it came to education, Carter was committed to improving the American school system. One of his major moves was the creation of the Department of Education in 1979, which sought to ensure that the federal government would have a greater role in shaping education policy. He was determined to increase federal investment in schools, particularly those serving low-income and minority communities. He said education is the key to opportunity and success. It is the bedrock of our nation's promise. The legislation reflected his belief in the power of education to uplift individuals and strengthen society. His presidency also coincided with a significant energy crisis, driven by the after effects of the 1973 oil embargo and continued reliance on foreign oil. Carter set out to reduce this dependence, saying, "The energy crisis is real. It is worldwide. It is a clear and present danger to our nation. These are facts, and we must simply face them." To address this issue, Carter signed the National Energy Act of 1978, a series of laws aimed to promote energy conservation and reduce dependency on imported oil. It established incentives for alternative energy development, promoted energy efficiency, and deregulated natural gas prices. In addition, Carter promoted the development of renewable energy sources like solar power and wind energy. Despite these efforts, OPEC's actions caused oil prices to soar from $13 to over $34 a barrel, which deeply impacted the nation. Americans had to endure long gas lines during the summer of 1979 and skyrocketing fuel costs that left many frustrated.
This is the second gas line this morning.
What happened at the first?
They ran out.
I think it's terrible. I really think it's terrible.
Isn't this disgusting? Why doesn't anybody contact the president? Why is he letting this happen to us?
I've been in 2 gas lines already.
This morning?
This morning.
How long did you wait for the first one?
I've been in both lines over an hour.
Okay, I got just enough. If I just about make it till tomorrow. I got a little less than half a tank, and I got to go out to Glendale, Brooklyn, New York, and this is business. This is not pleasure. But I'll manage. It's guaranteed.
On July 15, 1979, Carter famously addressed the nation's malaise in a televised speech.
It is a crisis of confidence. It is a crisis that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will. We can see this crisis in the growing doubt about the meaning of our own lives and in the loss of a unity of purpose for our nation,
in which he described a lack of confidence in America's purpose and its future, with remarks like, "Too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption." Well, the American people didn't really appreciate this, and he was widely ridiculed for it.
I give you our 39th president, Jimmy Carter.
Oh, come on! He's history's greatest monster!
This sentiment added to the growing dissatisfaction as many Americans struggled to balance rising costs with a perceived lack of leadership. Long-term wise, consumption of foreign oil did go down from 48% when Carter took office to 40% in 1980, with a reduction of 1.8 million barrels a day. When Carter left office, there were high inventories of oil and a surplus of natural gas. As someone who spent much of his early life surrounded by nature, Carter sought to make an impact which was evident in his efforts to preserve public lands and ensure a sustainable future. In 1978, Carter signed the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, which protected over 100 million acres of land in Alaska, creating national parks and wilderness areas. Other environmental laws signed by Carter addressed energy conservation, and the Clean Air Act of 1970 taking a more active role in addressing pollution. Federal mine safety standards such as the Surface Mining Control Act, which set the first federal environmental standards for strip mining. Despite his best efforts, Carter gained a reputation for political ineptitude, and as Carter said in 1979, the problems are complex and the solutions are difficult, but the American people are strong enough to confront these challenges. From the moment he took office in 1977, Carter declared that the days of unilateral interventionism were over. He intended to infuse a new morality in American diplomacy, one grounded in the pursuit of human rights. Carter made this cause explicit in his inaugural address.
Because we are free, we can never be indifferent to the fate of freedom elsewhere. Our moral sense dictates a clear-cut preference for those societies which share with us an abiding respect for individual human rights.
Carter aimed to take U.S. foreign policy in a fresh direction. He didn't want America's focus to be solely on countering the Soviet Union. Instead, he believed every country had its own challenges and deserved to be approached individually. Of course, opinions on his approach are mixed. Critics say he weakened the United States' position in the world, while supporters say he was simply dealt a bad hand. His presidency is often remembered for its moral vision, but also for the perceived failures to adapt that vision to the complex realities of the international stage. However, the greatest foreign policy success of the Carter presidency involved the Middle East, where he mediated a peace agreement between Israel's Menachem Begin and Egypt's Anwar Sadat. As part of the deal, Israel would withdraw from the entire Sinai Peninsula. The United States would establish monitoring posts to ensure that neither side attacked the other. Israel and Egypt would recognize each other's governments and sign a peace treaty. For their efforts, Begin and Sadat were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1978. But while the Camp David Accords were a step forward, they had a narrow focus on Egypt and Israel, leaving out the bigger picture, the broader Arab-Israeli conflict and the Palestinian issue. It didn't include any Palestinian representatives, which is why the UN rejected it. Additionally, Egypt faced backlash from other Arab nations, leading to its temporary isolation. Eventually, Anwar Sadat was assassinated in 1981 by Arab nationalists in his own army. One of Carter's first challenges involved the U.S. role in Panama. A top concern was the spread of anti-imperialist sentiment. In 1964, a group of Panamanian students entered the Canal Zone and raised the Panamanian flag in support of gaining 100% of their country back. The ensuing violence killed at least 20 Panamanian protesters and 4 U.S. soldiers. This became known in Panama as Dia de los Mártires, Martyrs' Day. It sparked a diplomatic crisis and more sympathy for the students' nationalist cause. Another concern was the military dictator of Panama, General Omar Torrijos, who seized power in a coup d'etat in 1968. He was ready to go to great lengths to take back control of the canal for Panama. whatever it took. Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State, explained, "If these canal negotiations fail, we will be beaten to death in every international forum and there will be riots all over Latin America." So the pressure was on for President Carter, who was also concerned about the unfairness of the situation historically. So he concluded negotiations with Omar, resulting in the Torrijos-Carter treaties in 1977. In these agreements, Carter promised to hand over control of the canal to Panama by 1999, ending almost a century of U.S. control. It was a big step toward Panamanian sovereignty and marked a major shift in how the canal was governed. The treaty aimed to improve U.S.-Latin American relations, which had been strained due to U.S. interventionist policies. By returning control, the U.S. sought to foster goodwill and lead to a more stable and cooperative relationship. But not everyone was on board. Carter faced a lot of backlash from the American public. Many thought giving up control weakened the U.S. global standing. The opposition was loud, with many warning, "This opens the door for dangerous foreign influence in the region," while others argued the canal was too important strategically for both U.S. military and economic interest. The decision was super divisive, and it's still widely debated today, with critics calling Carter soft on foreign policy and accusing him of just giving it away. In Nicaragua, Carter faced a tough decision about how to handle the revolutionary movement led by the Sandinista National Liberation Front, FSLN, which aimed to overthrow Anastasio Somoza's long-standing dictatorship. Things came to a head in 1979 when American journalist William D. Stewart was publicly executed by government forces, and the footage spread across the U.S., sparking outrage. And the administration quickly distanced itself, cutting off military aid and withdrawing support for the regime. By July of that year, Somoza fled, and the Sandistas, led by figures like Daniel Ortega and Tomás Borge, took control. The U.S. even sent $99 million in aid, hoping to build a positive relationship, but that hope was short-lived. The Sandistas soon began consolidating power, declaring a state of emergency, and that elections were unnecessary. To make matters worse, they began supporting revolutionaries in neighboring El Salvador. Meanwhile, the Salvadoran government, run by a military junta, was locked in a brutal civil war. After violence escalated, Carter initially cut off military aid to the Salvadoran National Guard and urged other countries to stop helping too. That bout of conscience was short-lived as well. Worried that the Sandistas could gain more influence in the region, Carter reauthorized military assistance, initiating a massive flow of funds, weapons, training, and advisors. During this time, Catholic activists protested against the junta's oppression of impoverished citizens. Archbishop of San Salvador, Oscar Romero, wrote a letter to President Carter expressing great concern of the U.S. to prohibit the giving of this military aid to the Salvadoran government. Carter never responded, and Romero was gunned down during Mass on March 24, 1980. On December 1980, the abduction and murder of 4 U.S. churchwomen in El Salvador convinced President Carter to suspend assistance to the country. He also sent a presidential investigation to look into the crime. After a major offensive by the FMLN in January 1981, Carter was still concerned about the Sandistas taking control, so the U.S. still continued to provide military aid to the Salvadoran government.
China and America, new beginnings.
On January 1, 1979, the two countries officially recognized one another, exchanging ambassadors and opening embassies. To do so required the severing of diplomatic ties and withdrawal of recognition of non-communist Taiwan. Carter even went a step further and canceled the 1955 Mutual Defense Treaty with Taiwan, effective January 1, 1980. The problem was, some argued that the president couldn't just drop a treaty like that without Senate approval. Among the critics was Republican Senator Barry Goldwater, along with other members of Congress. Basically, they said, you can't do that, so they sued him. This led to Goldwater versus Carter, 1979, which was a U.S. Supreme Court case that questioned whether the president had the authority to end a treaty independently. However, the Supreme Court didn't even want to touch it. They said it was a political question for the president and Congress to figure it out, and no real decision was made. Still, it stirred up plenty of debate, and it highlighted the tension between Congress and President Carter. In the meantime, Congress found a workaround to keep some sort of connection with Taiwan. They passed the Taiwan Relations Act, which allowed unofficial ties with the island to continue. Also, the U.S. continued supplying Taiwan with arms, which didn't exactly make China happy. While relations with China moved forward, this part of the deal left some lingering friction. To further complicate matters, his younger brother, Billy, the black sheep of the Carter family, constantly drunk. He was known to be pretty crude in public, and used his brother's presidency to launch his own beer. Congress, and along with plenty of other critics, were concerned with his connections with Libya, a country ruled by the dictator Muammar al-Gaddafi, a financial backer of international terrorism. Billy Carter received a mysterious $220,000 loan, of which the New York Times speculated only $1,000 was repaid. Billy became the center of a swirling storm of allegations about influence peddling. A Senate subcommittee was called to investigate, which the press quickly dubbed as Billygate. Jimmy Carter expressed his concern, saying, "I'm deeply concerned that Billy has received funds from Libya and that he may be under obligation to Libya. These facts will govern my relationship with Billy as long as I am president. Billy has no influence on U.S. policy or actions concerning Libya in the past, and he will have no influence in the future." Billy indulged in it. In fact, he told his inquisitors, "I ain't a foreign agent. I'm entitled to have friends. If you don't like my friends, tough luck." In the end, the investigation cleared President Carter of any direct involvement or misconduct. But Billy Carter was ordered to pay back the $200,000 loan, and he also had to comply with legal requirements, including paying a fine for failing to register as a foreign agent. However, the incident remained a point of controversy and embarrassment for the Carter administration throughout its time in office. The invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union in December 1979 was an additional international crisis. At the head of Carter's foreign policy team was Zbigniew Brzezinski, his national security advisor and closest confidant on global affairs. He was known for his progressive internationalist views, but was also strongly anti-communist, which heavily influenced the administration's approach. As a result, Carter's Fairness Not Force slogan was replaced with a new Carter Doctrine, an aggressive national security strategy focused on the Persian Gulf region that included a 5% annual increase in defense spending. Beyond military strategy, Carter imposed economic sanctions on the Soviet Union.
"I will not issue any permits for Soviet ships to fish in the coastal waters of the United States. I've cut Soviet access to high-technology equipment and to agricultural products. I've limited other commerce with the Soviet Union, and I've asked our allies and friends to join with us in restraining their own trade with the Soviets and not to replace our own embargoed items."
including a grain embargo. However, this move backfired domestically. American farmers took the biggest hit, with 17 million tons of grain production canceled almost overnight. Many couldn't recover financially, leading to bankruptcies, lands being auctioned off, and a tragic rise in farmer suicide rates.
I had several hundred bushels of grain in bins, and like I say, my net worth dropped $20,000 overnight.
What was meant to punish the Soviets ended up devastating rural America. He also called for a boycott of the 1980 Summer Olympic Games in Moscow.
And I have notified the Olympic Committee that with Soviet invading forces in Afghanistan, neither the American people nor I will support sending an Olympic team to Moscow.
In retrospect, it's easy to see that the boycott was a hollow gesture. The Soviet Union didn't change its behavior, and the US didn't look particularly great for punishing athletes who had trained their whole lives for the Olympics. On the military side, Carter authorized an increase in covert support to the Afghan Mujahideen, providing them with non-lethal aid such as food, medical supplies, and intelligence. In his defense of aiding Afghanistan, Carter stated, "The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan is the most serious threat to peace since the Second World War." However, critics argue that his approach to the crisis showed indecision and miscalculation. This showcased the limits of Carter's idealism. Despite his focus on human rights and diplomacy, his administration had to face the harsh realities of Cold War geopolitics. The United States viewed Iran as a major force of stability in the Persian Gulf region. With its strong military and pro-Western stance, Iran ensured access to oil and acted as a barrier against Soviet expansion. However, protests were brewing in Iran over the Shah's oppressive dictatorship. Political opposition was silenced, freedoms were restricted, and economic inequality grew, benefiting a wealthy elite while many Iranians struggled. Despite this, Carter continued to support him, fearing the alternative, Ayatollah Khomeini. When the Shah was overthrown, Pahlavi fled into exile in January 1979. When President Carter found out that he was dying from cancer, he allowed him to come into the United States for medical treatment, a move that infuriated many in Iran. On November 4th, 1979, Iranian student protesters, furious at this decision, stormed the American embassy in Tehran. They took 66 Americans hostage, eventually holding 52 of them for a staggering 444 days, demanding that the Shah return to stand trial. The event became a rallying point for Khomeini, helping him to consolidate power. Back in the US, the crisis dominated the news. Reports of torture horrified the public, and nightly updates, such as America held hostage, kept the issue front and center. Americans grew impatient with the seemingly ineffective president who could not get the hostages released. Then came Operation Eagle Claw, a rescue mission Carter authorized in April 1980. But it was a disaster. A sandstorm grounded several helicopters outside Tehran, and 8 U.S. Special Force members died in a crash. To make matters worse, Iran captured U.S. intelligence and equipment. The failure of the rescue mission was a major blow to Carter's presidency, politically sealing his fate. The election of 1980 marked the end of Carter's presidency. Reagan's message of strength, economic recovery, and a new era of American greatness resonated with voters, and on November 4th, 1980, Reagan defeated Carter with 489 electoral votes and 50.7% of the popular vote. When Ronald Reagan was sworn in just minutes after Carter left office, the hostages weren't released until that January 1981. After leaving the White House, Jimmy Carter continued to serve his country, embarking on an extraordinary post-presidential career, dedicated to humanitarian work, advocacy, and a desire to help others. In 1982, Carter became University Distinguished Professor at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And in partnership with Emory, he and Mrs. Carter founded the Carter Center, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting global peace, health, and democracy, which played a significant role in addressing global health issues, promoting fair elections, and working toward peace in conflict-ridden areas. Under Carter's leadership, the center has played a critical role in the near eradication of Guinea worm disease, a debilitating parasitic illness. When their effort began, there were approximately 3.5 million cases worldwide. By 2025, that number has dropped to less than 20 cases. Carter's humility about the success is emblematic of his character. People's lives are being saved every day, he remarked. That's the best reward I could ask for. In 2002, Jimmy Carter was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his decades of untiring effort to find peaceful solutions to international conflicts, to advance democracy and human rights, and to promote economic and social development. Carter's post-presidential years has also been marked by his role as a diplomatic mediator. He has been instrumental in negotiating peace agreements, often at great personal risk. Among the program's achievements was the negotiation of the 1995 Guinea worm ceasefire, which gave international health workers an unprecedented period of almost 6 months of relative peace, allowing health workers to enter areas of Sudan previously inaccessible due to the fighting in the areas. In his 2006 memoir Beyond the White House, Carter reflected, "Peace is not a static condition. It is something that must be pursued and earned with effort, persistence, and often great sacrifice." Another hallmark of Carter's post-presidency has been his involvement with Habitat for Humanity, the nonprofit organization dedicated to building affordable homes for low-income families. Carter's relationship with Habitat began in the late 1980s, when he and his wife Rosalind volunteered on a construction site in New York. In his 1992 memoir Turning Point, he describes his first experiences with the organization. It was an eye-opening experience to work alongside people from all walks of life, from high school students to the elderly, and to witness how deeply they believed in the simple, powerful idea that everyone deserves a decent place to live. What started as a short-term volunteer activity quickly grew into a lifelong commitment. The Carters became tireless advocates, and they rallied thousands of volunteers and celebrities, helping Habitat for Humanity become internationally recognized for its work. He didn't just provide financial support. Carter physically worked alongside volunteers, helping to build, repair, or renovate over 4,300 homes. This hands-on approach to philanthropy was extraordinary for a former president, and he didn't just work in the US but across the world, working side by side with families where they made a lasting impact on local communities. Faith was a cornerstone of Carter's life and actions. Growing up as a devout Baptist, religion has always played a key role in Jimmy Carter's life, from a young boy in the South to being the longest-lived U.S. president. Throughout his life, he was active in church work, and he also taught Sunday school in Plains, Georgia, well into his 90s. In his book Faith, A Journey for All, Carter explores faith's broader meanings, different ways that it sustains our lives, and how to find faith even in the darkest of times. He wrote, "The issue of faith arises in almost every area of existence, and I have included a description of the ways my faith has guided and sustained me, as well as how it has challenged and driven me to seek a closer and better relationship with people and with God." In his later years, Carter's health has faced significant challenges, but his resilience has been a testament to both his physical and mental strength. By 2016, Carter announced that he was cancer-free. In his book, A Full Life, he wrote, "I had no idea how long I had left, but I was determined to make the most of every moment." Writing became a medium through which Carter could connect with people and share his wisdom. He had an insatiable quest for meaningful dialogue with the world. He said, "There's still so much I want to say." Carter's love for writing flourished after leaving office, with more than 30 books spanning memoirs, reflections on faith, in-depth commentary on social and political issues, and even fishing, including his personal life, Christmas in Plains. He dabbled in fiction from time to time, and he's also been nominated 10 times for the Grammy Award for Best Spoken Word Album for audio recordings of his book, and has won 4 times. He said, "I believe that anyone can be successful in life, regardless of natural talent or the environment within which we live. This is not based on measuring success by human competitiveness for wealth, possessions, influence, and fame, but adhering to God's standards of truth, justice, humility, service, compassion, forgiveness, and love." On December 29, 2024, Jimmy Carter passed away at the age of 100. He was buried at his home in Plains, Georgia, next to his wife, Rosalind.